okay? There's more to it than just the interest rate. The S&L crisis would have happened no matter what the interest rate was. So at the end of the day, and I might be missing something here, and a lot of you understand monopoly a lot better than I do, and you can think it through and be part of the answer, I guess, rather than part of the problem, and recognize, yes, monopolists are price setter. Okay, on the lending side, we are the monopolist. The central bank needs to make sure it doesn't loan unsecured in unlimited quantities, because it will result in risk. Doesn't have to happen. You're risking some kind of hyperinflationary situation. Well, what does that really mean? Well, when we lend on home, the government agencies have access to basically government-insured funding. Well, can they just give people a check and say, go buy a house and just promise me that you're going to buy a house? No. They take a first mortgage, they have appraisals. Can they say, look, there's appraisals, but we're worried about this housing bubble and everything else. We're the ones funding it. We want to limit these, we're going to go examine these appraisals and we're not going to allow this. Sure, you can do all that stuff. Or none of it. And the consequences are, to me, obvious what's going to happen, or the risks are obvious, or what's going to happen. And what's going on is obvious, and it doesn't mean that the government doesn't have control of the prices, and it doesn't mean that you're not price setter. It means you're doing what you're doing. I think you know what I'm talking about here. Now, let's look at the other thing with the price setter. Suppose the government said, okay, we're not going to pay a penny more for anything this year that we spend than we paid last year. And then all prices in the economy go up for whatever reason. What happens to government spending? It goes to zero. And then what happens? Okay, you get a little bit of deflation. Suddenly there's $3 trillion less in government spending. And because where's the private sector going to get the money to pay the tax? They have to come back to the government and hit bids and buy and sell to the government. There's no other place to get the money to pay the tax. Now, that would be a zero inflation environment. If that situation occurs where prices go up, the government has the option to just say we're not paying it. Now, we saw that happen in a limited way as monopsony buyer in the medical area. Prices were going up too fast, and all of a sudden Medicare, what these guys say, well, we're not going to pay that much. Well, nobody has any other source of funding, and prices don't go up. Now, there's other consequences. People don't go to medical school, you don't have doctors, you're left out in the hall. I'm not disagreeing with any of that. But at the very narrow idea of being a monopolist, you are setting price, but it might not be good policy. It might be better policy to just go ahead and pay more as price setter and let some inflation take place, or let a one-time adjustment, because you're not forced to accelerate this thing every year, than it is to just say, no, we're not going to pay any more and we'll let it come down. And the option that opens up with the ELR is that you use that pool to set the price of unskilled labor. Right now we set it at zero with unemployment. We have an unemployed buffer stock. The buffer stock is only effective if it can provide what we call two-way action. You have to be able to absorb labor as it gets shed from the private sector, and then you got to be able to feed it back in as the private sector expands. Otherwise, it's not an effective buffer stock. Okay, and so unemployment is not an effective buffer stock, and that's why this neighborhood thing gets higher and higher. And I would guess that they really think it's about 9% in Europe, and 7% unemployment is scaring these central bankers, and they're going to be raising rates even with no growth, because they see a little labor unions here and there. They're in a panic when they see 7%. Here, I think we're going in that direction, and I've predicted we're going to see studies showing that the real neighborhood here is 7% and not 5%, and the only reason it was 5% was globalization, and now that's over, and it was an artificial thing. And they're going to come up. And what's happening is that as they see inflation, they're trying to use unemployment as a buffer stock, and it takes a larger and larger pool because it doesn't function in a two-way direction. Yeah, it's like somebody said, the Roach Motel. You check in, you never check out. Once you become unemployed, your ability to become reemployed has gone way, way down. Nobody wants to hire unemployed people. They only want to hire people who are already working. And we have good data on this from the Jefes program in Argentina, where Daniel's not here this time, but after Argentina blew up with 32 dead in the street one night with another blown up fixed exchange rate, he got this program in where they had they hired anybody, had a household willing and able to work for peanuts. And they got 2 million people in a population of a little over 30 million took this job who had never worked before, never had any prospects of being in the labor force. Within 2 years, 750,000 of them were hired by the private sector. So you got a company that needs somebody to work in the kitchen, making soup. When you see somebody in a Hefe's program soup cafeteria is already doing it, you go to the boss, this person any good? Yeah, okay, we'll hire him. Now, if that person was unemployed wherever they were before, it never would have happened. And so what happens is this employed buffer stock gives you two-way action. It's easier to send people in because you're not sending them, pushing them down so far when you don't need them, and it's a whole lot easier to hire them. They actually do get hired versus unemployed who never get hired. Am I close on those statistics, Randy? Okay. So this becomes a policy option only when you understand that you don't have a government solvency issue. And that's the whole point of this approach we're making, and what we're trying to get into public policy is that there are other options when some of these myths or mental blockages go away. Right? And it's not because I'm trying to advocate any one policy over another. I just know that there are all these options that are pro-agenda for most of the political parties that don't even get considered. Now, I was in Washington a few weeks ago and I had two meetings. One with a guy from the far right, Heritage Foundation, former Bush speechwriter, Bush 1. I don't know if that's any better. I don't know why I qualified. And we go through this exact same thing. He goes, yeah, I'm going to put this in my blog, which he did. And we got to keep in touch. And I'm coming up with ways I want you to speak here and speak there. It's like, okay, I guess sees me as some kind of right winger or something. And then I meet another guy, my partner's brother, Alan Rieger, who's way over on the left. What he does is digs up dirt on all the right-wing guys so that the Democrats can win their elections. And we go through this whole thing, and he goes, yeah, this is good stuff. We got to get this out there. And he's starting to talk to me about his friends who I have to go talk to. So I think I'm pretty much apolitical on all these things. And I do think they serve the debate in general. And that's what is trying to be promoted, that whatever you are, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, there are options that are not being considered. Now, I was just talking about, oh, it's gone, talking about Mexico. There's a lot of options that aren't being considered because they've got these mental blocks about what you have to do with the exchange rate, what you have to do with the budget, what you have to do with this. These things don't exist, okay? And this is what this is all about. And thanks for attending, and hopefully some of it gets back. And does anybody have any questions? Because the answer here and getting an understanding of it is what it's all about, not the form, but the substance. So, yes. Oh, other than Mario's, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you what you just said at the end there about the political aspect. I mean, I could imagine a right-wing government implementing an ELR and a left-wing government implementing an ELR.
Right.
And my concern would be which one would be socially desirable. On that basis, I would certainly not like to see a right-wing government implement an ELR.
Well, I could see. Look, I could see.
It's not apolitical in that sense for me.
Yeah, I could see a neoclassical central bank demanding it as a more effective buffer stock for unemployment, right? And so, is there really a difference fundamentally between neoclassics and Keynes or anybody else on any of these points? Well, when you get down to specifying what currency regime are you talking about, because I've seen arguments back and forth where there's violent disagreement, but I know one's talking about fixed exchange rate, one's talking about floating. But so when you really get down to an apples-to-apples comparison, there's very little. And did anybody hear my Keynes versus the classics thing? The argument is, Keynes said without a monopoly, or the classics said without a monopoly you don't have unemployment, and so we've got to break the labor unions and all this, and then the market will clear and there won't be any unemployment. Keynes said even in the absence of monopoly, you're still going to get unemployment. Why? Because you're going to have lack of aggregate demand in the monetary system, and for whatever reason, and market price consumer, whatever. So, am I right, Paul? Yeah. Okay. Tell me. Just start. Don't let me go astray here. Okay. And what I'm saying, look, what Keynes was talking about is a currency monopoly. And so, in that sense, the classics were right that you can't have. In the monopoly, the monopolist is putting a tax on the population and then not spending enough to fill the need to pay the tax and to net save. So it's a monopolist restricting, government not deficit spending enough is a monopolist restricting supply, which is exactly what the neoclassics said causes unemployment, and exactly what Keynes said you don't have to have. And then he described a monopolist restricting supply as why you can have unemployment, and the classics disagreed with him. So this argument was just